The portal hits Nebraska's defense and the quarterback room. We discuss next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if that bet hits. Head to FanDuel.com to get started today.
Okay, welcome in. It is Wednesday. It is signing day. National Signing Day is here. The holiday, the big day for college football, and we're continuing to talk about the transfer portal, wondering what Wednesday will bring after busy Monday and Tuesday in Lincoln. We will get to this signing class and discuss a bit of what you can expect out of Lincoln here on Wednesday. Matt Rhule has a press conference scheduled for 1 p.m. to talk about the new signees. Of course, he's going to address the departure of Tony White to Florida State, other things that are happening around Nebraska football. On Tuesday, Nebraska lost to the portal quarterback Daniel Kaelin, linebacker / defensive lineman Princewill Umanmielen, and defensive end James Williams. How about that? I just figure out how to say his name, Umanmielen, without tripping over myself, and he's gone.
Perfect timing. God's plan. Yeah. It was another portal-filled day. Yesterday, I wonder what's to come today as we're recording this on Wednesday morning. Of course, there'll be a signing day press conference. Obviously, I mean, we could zoom in. I mean, there's a lot now of missing spots on that defensive depth chart. If you pull up the two deep from the Iowa game, and slash everybody out in red who's no longer eligible after this season, there's a lot of red on there. But the quarterback room is already a very interesting picture, and I think it just became a little bit more interesting yesterday.
Yeah, let's just reset this thing from the top, by the way. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic.
Yeah.
Connor Happer of 1620 of The Zone is with me. Yeah, that's the subject I think we want to dive into first is Daniel Kaelin. And I wonder, were you surprised when you saw that news come out Tuesday morning? He was the first of the three to announce that he was leaving. And, you flash back. I immediately flashed back to a year ago, and I remember the awkwardness of December 2023 for Daniel Kaelin, because he had been all in on Nebraska since June of that year. I think it was May of that year when he committed. He decommitted from Missouri, and it was full steam ahead. He was the point man in putting together a lot of that 2024 class for Nebraska. And then in December, all of the attention turned to Dylan Raiola. And, Danny's decision to do what he did in the spring was largely dependent on what Raiola was doing. It looked like Raiola was trending toward Nebraska coming out of the spring season in 2023. And so Danny said, I gotta do something else. And he committed to Mizzou. And then when Dylan committed to Georgia, it flipped back to Nebraska for Kaelin. And here we are a year later, and Raiola has been entrenched as the starting quarterback. So even though Kaelin gave it a shot for 12 months, like, he's got to look out for himself, and he's got to go a place where he's going to have an opportunity to be the starter. And as long as Dylan's at Nebraska and healthy, that's probably not going to happen in Lincoln. So I don't fault him at all. In fact, credit him for sticking it out and for giving it a year after he kind of knew in December of last year, like, the direction that this was going to head with Raiola, the 5-star.
Yeah, I think it's only surprising right from that context. He and there was a timing thing that went into his decision to end up at Nebraska in the first place, right? Or I guess in the second place. Basically, after Dylan Raiola committed last year, there was very limited time until signing day happened. He didn't have a ton of open options at that point. Considering it was just so late and all the spots had filled up, and you want to go somewhere you're comfortable, and you knew Nebraska was going to take you. And so, he comes in and he competes for a year, and there's flashes in spring and there's flashes in the fall. Obviously he wasn't going to start. for the foreseeable future, or at least as long as Dylan Raiola is here. And so, no, you don't blame him. So it's definitely not a surprise from that reason, but maybe it's a surprise from the sense of, all right, well, he was sticking it out, and you were trying to get that separation, right? He took his redshirt year, and there's a path to him starting, but it probably doesn't go into effect for at least another 2 years at Nebraska. So
right.
Find somewhere else.
That would be an uncommon kind of patience among college football players in today's world, especially quarterbacks. Yeah, Danny had an opportunity right there at the end on the last weekend of recruiting a year ago. And remember, signing day was right before Christmas last year instead of December 4th. He had an opportunity to make a visit to Michigan State on the weekend before signing day, and it was the new coach, Jonathan Smith, coming in, and I recall he was torn over that, and I got a message like on a Friday night of the weekend he was supposed to visit, and it's this was from his camp, and it was like, no, Danny didn't go on the trip. He's home. He's here. He's working out in Omaha. It's all go Big Red, that kind of thing. So I mean, his loyalty to Nebraska, it really runs deep, and he's one of those guys who, when he goes into the portal out of Nebraska, I'm really interested to see where it goes for him. Some players, they go and you kind of lose sight of them like the moment they hit the portal, and then a couple years later, it's like, oh yeah, that guy's at some school halfway across the country. How you check in on him? I think there's going to be interest on my part and from people in Nebraska to really want to follow Danny Kaelin. Like, we've known him since he was a freshman at Bellevue West. Like, before he even started a high school game is when he started getting offers. I'm interested to see what kind of offers he gets, where he goes. I think there will be Power 4 opportunities for him. There were plenty of them in addition to Nebraska a year ago, so I don't see why that would change. He looked good in the opportunities that we had to see him at practice in a Nebraska uniform. So that'll be something to watch for sure. I want to take it in this direction as we continue to talk about the quarterbacks. So what is the state of the Nebraska quarterback room now when you take Danny Kaelin out of this? Nebraska signing TJ Lateef today from Orange Lutheran in Orange County, California. He is a pocket passer by definition, but someone who's more mobile than what you see with Raiola. He does have the ability to scramble and get first downs with his feet, be elusive, which is a good thing. The offense that he ran, and I watched him play in the playoffs on the Friday night before the Nebraska USC game against good competition. What they do with him in that offense is they get him on the move, or he sits in the pocket and he throws. They have a running back who's a Division I player. They have a tight end who's a Power 4 player. He gets he distributes the ball to those guys in short and intermediate passes. Like, I didn't see him throw the ball down the field with great success a lot. So, is he your backup? Is Heinrich Harberg going to stick this out for another year, not just at Nebraska, but as a backup quarterback in his senior year? I'm really curious what direction this QB room is going to go.
You forgot about Jalen football.
Well, he walked on senior day, does have another year, but I don't know that I'm expecting him to be back. Yeah, I mean, Graham's dad could be a part of it.
Yeah. So either way, right? It's not the best situation in the world. I do like before we get into, I don't know, because people will hear this and they'll be like, whoa, that is kind of bad. Panic,
They can go to the portal.
This is not an uncommon situation. No. In fact, what Nebraska had last year with quarterbacks that it trusted and had they thought had really, really high ceilings and great development tracks, that was pretty rare. I think what Nebraska had in that room with a starter with a super high ceiling, a backup with experience, a season's worth of experience, and then a third string who has a great, future ahead of him as well in Kaelin. I think that's pretty that's what you want. But we always get into these discussions and people are like, well, yeah, you got to look at the quarterback room as a whole. I'm like, yeah, no, you really don't. I mean, you kind of just look at the starter, and obviously you don't want it to come to a world where the starter doesn't play for a significant gap of time. And if if that happens, then anybody is going to be in trouble, and it's not a good situation for anybody. So you want to mitigate that damage as much as possible. but like you don't get graded on your quarterback room. You get graded on your quarterback. So Nebraska could go into the portal for a safety net there, but it's tough to convince a guy who's going to come in from around the country and say, hey, do you want to come in and be Dylan Raio's backup for the next year or the next 2 years? And, in case he gets hurt, you can go play. Tough sell. So it's sort of the same spot they were in last year when it felt like they were going to have Kyle McCord, I guess, as their starting quarterback. So not unfamiliar.
Chubba Purdy's in the portal again. The former Nebraska, where did Chubba start his career? Did he go to Florida State?
Florida State, yeah.
I felt like Florida State was just on my mind too much because of everything else that's going on in the Nebraska football world, and maybe I was misremembering that. So he's been at Florida State, he's been at Nebraska, he's been at Nevada. I don't know that he will be returning to Nebraska, but somebody could have to come in through the portal, because I wonder about Harberg, and generally I don't like to speculate. Like, people will ask all the time, do you think this player might go in the portal? And like, we don't know. Like, you can look at somebody who is from California or Texas and say, well, they're less likely to stay. They might be less loyal. We don't really know that. Like, that could be the most loyal person in the Nebraska program is somebody who grew up far, far away and not in Lincoln, Nebraska. So it's really hard to speculate on like who's the biggest flight risk. Like, you think, oh, it's not the local kids, but that's not necessarily how things work out. I do feel okay, though, asking the question about Heinrich Harberg and does he want to stay here for another year? Like, if there's anybody in this program, and there are other players, but he's one guy in this program who has shown loyalty, unquestioned loyalty to Nebraska. And maybe we talk about this after the break. What do we see as the future for Heinrich Harberg? And does he want to be the Nebraska backup for one more year? Let's get to that when we come back after this. All right. Do you hate the team that you drafted in season-long fantasy but want to stay in the action? We're here to introduce Better Together, a new sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network and the first cooperative daily fantasy platform. You heard that right, where teamwork triumphs talent, and you get to play with your friends, not against them. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on real-time stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds, and then climb the leaderboard. Better Together provides a sense of camaraderie and enhances the social experience of watching sports. And that's what we need, more social experience as we watch sports. Stay connected, put your group chat to the test, and then prove that your picks are the best. Did that rhyme? I think it did. I just rhymed that thing. It's like a poem. Better Together provides a sense of camaraderie and enhances the social experience of watching sports. I already said this. Download Better Together now from the App Store. Sign up using the promo code Locked On for a chance to play in a contest with or against your friends, because winning alone is fun, but it's better together.
All right. Heinrich Harberg,
yes.
as that's the topic. We're going to talk about the defense and the defensive players that Nebraska lost in the transfer portal over the last couple of days as well. But welcome back, Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you. So I think the question for Heinrich Harberg, obviously you sort of laid it out. He's looking at his situation at Nebraska and probably thinking, man, I did this a year. It's going to be the same thing next year. And there's no, I know how that's going to go. So maybe your natural reaction would be, oh, let's jump into the portal. But I do think the player has to think about what kind of options might be out there for them. And is the grass greener on the other side? I mean, Heinrich Harberg is, pretty close to playing time right here. He doesn't have a whole lot of, I guess it's a question of like, what does he want to be? What does he want to become? Because if he wants to be if he wants to be a guy who gets in the field, helps the team, is a gadget player, and is the backup quarterback, I mean, he's got that role here. He would continue to do that next year. But does he want to be an NFL quarterback? Or I don't know what his aspirations are. Here is probably not the place.
I think there's three options for him. One, he can go in the portal and try to be a quarterback at another school. I don't know if he has a Power 4 opportunity, but I'm sure he could do it at a mid-level Division I program. Two, he can come back and say, I'm going to ride this thing. You never know what's going to happen. Most seasons, the backup quarterback is needed. I'm committed to doing everything I can to help the Nebraska program. If he's gone from the quarterback room or from Nebraska together, and Nebraska can't get somebody out of the portal, it puts the Huskers in a tough spot because you're one play away from TJ Lateef, which, I mean, we saw how tough it was for Dylan Raiola to play as a true freshman this year. Like, Lateef is not at that level of development coming in to Nebraska. Or you can be Harburg and you can say, look, I want Dana Holgorsen to commit to me that we're going to do something different with me, Harburg, as an offensive weapon. Like, leave the quarterback room at Nebraska. If you have to come back because there's a long-term injury to the starter, okay, like, it's not out of the realm of possibility, but could he be a tight end? Could he be an H-back? Could he be something in this offense, like, fully committed to it that works for him, which is probably the best track, the only track for him to then take his game to the NFL.
Right. Yeah. I think so too, but I'm not sure what he wants. I'm not sure how he views himself. I think he would be a sneaky, as you mentioned, a sneaky, really important guy for Nebraska to have on their roster next year, all of a sudden without the safety net of Kaelin sitting back there. So yeah, that's certainly one to watch. Is, you look at any situation and you're like, well, there's a guy who's older who's sitting behind a log jam that probably has transfer portal written on it at least a little bit. So I think it's fair to at least wonder out loud, as people have been for the last couple of years. Let's talk about those defensive guys for a second that entered the transfer portal really over the last 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. I mean, a few starters, obviously. I mean, we got to Jamari Butler on Monday, Mekhi Bayer on Monday. I think that was happening live
during the show.
The podcast. But yesterday, Princewill, Umanmielen, James Williams. I mean, Nebraska has lost a lot now on the defensive line, both old and young. They've lost seniors. They've lost, younger developmental players as well. I mean, that is an empty-ish too deep for whoever Nebraska's next defensive coordinator is.
Yeah, and it's going to have to include some portal guys. Like, they're going to have to go to the portal to get defensive players. You have Elijah Judy, who did walk on senior day, but later announced that he's coming back, and he's someone with experience. You have Riley Van Poppel, who redshirted this year, and I think slots in as a starter next season. You have Cam Lenhart, who, I don't know if he needs to get bigger or what needs to happen with him to be able to hold up, like, in the run defense, but didn't have the sophomore season, like the breakout kind of sophomore season that it looked like might occur after his true freshman year in the Nebraska program. And then it's a bunch of young guys. James Williams, it surprises me. Princewill, not as much. A lot of his playing time late in the season went to Willis McGahee, the fourth, at the jack linebacker spot. I think Princewill was caught a little bit between, like, the defensive end and jack spot. Like, what does he play? And he fit at jack this year, but does it really fit his skill set more than, like, being a defensive lineman? Like, Tony White and Matt Rhule kind of warned a little bit going into the season about players like Princewill and Cam Lenhart, like, getting caught in a sophomore situation where they didn't go all the way to the next level. And I think that kind of happened.
Yeah.
Has happened for both of those guys. Lenhart's got a game left. The bowl game, there's a bowl game at Nebraska this month to finish off his season. But James Williams surprised me. I felt like he was a good fit at Nebraska, and obviously Nebraska found him and gave him life in his college football journey that probably was not going to happen if that situation didn't exist in Nebraska. But he's got to do what's best for him, and he sees that that happening outside of Nebraska. This is potentially splitting him up from Terrence Knighton too, who he talked about so glowingly after the Rutgers game when Williams had a couple of sacks in October. Knighton's still here. Knighton's still at Nebraska. Does he go to Florida State with Tony White? Remains to be seen.
Yeah. What you mentioned is something that I think we recognized throughout the season this year, which Nebraska, especially on the defensive side of the ball, really leaned heavily into its older players and I mean, leaned on them for more snaps than they did the year before in 2023. And, because of that, obviously, you thought you were going to get more out of the defense, and that didn't end up happening. But then as the sort of secondary result off of that, you weren't probably able to develop those players, Princewill, Cam Lenhart, to the level maybe you thought they were. It just didn't feel like they made that jump. So that is, I mean, Princewill is probably the first guy that I think of when I think of who got caught up in that this year. And because he kind of emerged in 2023 and wasn't a factor at all in 2024. So I think that's sort of maybe a regret, I guess, from this year, but they went all in on those older guys, and they sort of leaned on them quite a bit. So yeah, the answer will have to be the portal. There's still a few guys in that room, as you mentioned, that they could develop, but they'll have to go into the portal, and in order to do that, they'll probably have to know who their defensive coordinator is going to be first.
And in that defensive front 6 or 7, it could be 7 if they run a 4-3. We don't know if Nebraska's going to run the 3-3-5 in 2025. Anyway, sometimes it's a front 7 even in the 3-3-5. They do love Willis McGahee. They do love Vincent Shavers, and Nebraska's able to retain those players. Then that's a base for them to use something to build on. And I think they love, and we'll get into a conversation after the break about the recruiting class that's signing today on Wednesday. They also love that true freshman linebacker group that they're signing, which includes Dawson Merritt, the former Alabama commit out of Kansas. They love Christian Jones, the linebacker commit out of Omaha West Side, and then some of the other young defensive players. Malcolm Simpson is a D lineman from Texas who's signing in this class too. So youth will be served for Nebraska on defense in 2025. I think that much we know, barring some mass entry, some, mass movement out of the portal of older players. I think they're trending on this thing to go with young players next season. So let's come back after the break and talk more about what we expect to be the big storylines from Nebraska on this signing day. That's next.
All right, Sapper, I want to tell you a little bit about FanDuel, which is, of course, America's #1 sportsbook. Only a few weeks left of the regular season in the NFL as we get ready for the push toward the playoff. Only one place to bet it. That is the FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app has everything you need. You can place live bets on the NFL. You can get in advance, take a look at those futures. Who's going to win a division? Who's going to make a conference championship game, make the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl? Everything is there for you on the FanDuel Sportsbook. So we want to give you a little cushion. How about place that first $5 bet, and if it wins, it's $150 in bonus bets. That will be nice come January and February, which is playoff time. Head to FanDuel.com and join today. Once again, that's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Final segment here on the Locked On Nebraska podcast on this Wednesday. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone in Omaha is here with me. Connor, I just noticed if you're watching on YouTube, you can see like a change in the background behind me. I don't know if you can make that out at all. There seems to be a massive amount of alcohol on display.
There is. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm not partaking in any of this. My wife decided to rearrange the area here that I use to tape the pod. I'm sitting in like a base part of our basement. It's a bar area.
That's the good
and
stuff.
Yeah, I noticed it's like I really am like selling the bar vibe here.
Is that the Don Julio?
Which now sits behind me. There's quite a bit. It's like the display kind of alcohol that the bottles you never want to open.
Nice.
So like the things that you give for gifts, which may have happened once or twice on this last weekend. Milestone day coming up for me on Friday. So we'll maybe not discuss that anymore.
Nice.
But
Nice.
All right, we are going to hear from Matt Rhule today. 1 p.m. is the scheduled time of the Nebraska signing day press conference. Head coach will talk about the recruits who sign. He will get asked and talk about Tony White and what's going on with Nebraska in the transfer portal. This was, I think what you'll hear is like, this was going to happen. Like, this is a year where there have to be large cut downs to the Nebraska roster, and not all of the players who leave are going to be the ones that you might have expected to leave. So keep that in mind as you prepare to hear from Matt Rhule and digest his comments. Also, if you have questions for us, we are going to do a mailbag as part of our Friday show that we kind of mash into the conference championship game picks tomorrow on Thursday. We'll have some reaction to what Rhule had to say this afternoon. So get your mailbag questions in on email, lockedonneb@gmail.com. Send them to us on Twitter or leave a comment in the YouTube comment section today. Some breaking news. Michael Terry, the 5-star out of San Antonio, has committed to Texas. He is signing with Texas this morning,
Shocking
not
news.
Nebraska. That one's been dragging on for like 9 months and really not a shock.
No, he really never committed all the way until the last day. Even though everyone the whole time was like, yeah, I think he's going to go to Texas, and that never changed. That's what you call playing the game a little bit. I like that. I like that from the young fella.
There was some internet scuttle that Oregon was coming in late on Tuesday to come after Michael Terry. And you know what that reeks of? That reeks of like milking every last dollar out of the NIL coffers that you possibly could going in as a recruit. And you know what I say to that? More power to him. If you're a 5-star and you're there in San Antonio and you've wanted to go to Texas all along, and I think he had a legitimate interest in Nebraska. Like, I think he was intrigued by things in Lincoln, but look at it. I mean, you can go an hour from home and play for a national championship contender, a team that will be a national championship contender year in and year out in the SEC. Or, you can take a big gamble and come somewhere where they're pushing up to get to 6-6 this year. And it takes a unique player to want to do what Dylan Raiola did a year ago and be a 5-star and come to Nebraska. He's the only one they've been able to close on. And obviously there were other factors at play there with the family and the connections. So no on Michael Terry. Nebraska still waits on Cortez Mills, the receiver from Homestead, Florida, who is wavering, I suppose you could say, on his commitment to Oklahoma and is expected to announce also today.
Yeah, I think the storyline, or one of them with this class, is Nebraska's return to the Kansas City area, probably spearheaded by Jamar Mosey. Obviously Dawson Merritt leads the crew there. But Isaiah Mosey, who's Jamar's son, is in there. Juju Marks is a good player. Jamarian Parker from the St. Louis area. So, I mean, Kansas City, St. Louis is always, Kansas City, Nebraska's had a lot of success there over the years, and then it's disappeared for the better part of the last decade. Yeah. And St. Louis has always been a tough nut to crack for Nebraska. And so it's good to get a couple players out of that area. And then there's a nice crop of in-state players as well. So when you add those up and the people that they're going to sign today, just in-state plus Kansas City, St. Louis, which is well within the 500-mile radius. I mean, we're talking about, 10 players right there. So it's a pretty good haul from within the region, which I'm pretty sure if you could make a blueprint, for Nebraska's class, it's pretty close to what it's basically going to end up being. A couple stars from around the country that they really, really like, and they go put a lot of resources into, and then load up on the best players from the 500-mile radius. And this class doesn't look any different than that.
Yeah, you go find a quarterback wherever you have to go to find the best quarterback, whether that's at Bellevue West or it's, in Orange County, California. You go do that, and you get the best players from around the Midwest. They went into the Dakotas again this year. I believe there's a player from South Dakota and one from North Dakota in this class. Nebraska's had success in doing that in recent years, so that's big. They'll of course recruit in Iowa and Colorado, and they hit some home runs a year ago in Florida, which was not as much a part of this class, but absolutely on the KC St. Louis thing. And you have to give credit on that to Keith Williams and to, as you said, Jamar Mosey. So changes in the way that coaches, assistant coaches recruited this year allowed Nebraska to send Keith Williams and Jamar Mosey on the road. They're not, quote, full-time position coaches. They have full-time jobs in the Nebraska football program, but they work in the office or work in assistant type roles to the coaches. And as long you can have 10 on the road. You can designate 10 coaches to go on the road. Doesn't have to be your offensive line coach. Doesn't have to be your running backs coach. Doesn't have to be your DC. So Williams and Mosey were hitting the road a lot, and obviously Jamar Mosey, former high school coach in Kansas City, did big time work to get those KC area players in. And they sent Keith Williams all over. Yeah, I mean, you get Jamarian Parker, who I think is maybe an overlooked but like really important piece because of the Holgorsen influence now with the way this offense will be. Like he's an Emmett Johnson kind of player, but more shifty, I think. Keith Williams was all over. Keith Williams was at TJ Latif's game on the Friday night before USC. So he's for sure one of Nebraska's most active recruiters here in this cycle.
Yeah, a lot of interesting names out of the class. And this it feels like a day almost that's just like shoehorned into all this other stuff now. It's totally like it used to have a lead up, and it was like, hey, wow, they're gonna all, and they still have ceremonies at their schools or whatever, but it's a day like specifically dedicated to this. Now it's just shoehorned in a whole bunch of stuff that's going on around college football. I mean, the playoff isn't even set yet. Conference championship weekend is this weekend. And coaches are moving all across the country. The transfer portal is opening, right? So I mean, there's so
Army
much
Navy.
going on.
It's like a week and a half away.
Army Navy, the biggest Army Navy game in a long time is coming up this next weekend. So yeah, it feels a little shoehorned in, but that's the life we live right now.
Heisman still to come. What do you think, as Matt Rhule takes the podium today, is the most pressing question for him?
That's a great question. I mean, maybe I think there's a whole bunch of there's maybe like 3 or 4 things with equal importance at the top, and it's like, hey, the Tony White situation.
Why did he go? Why I want to know why.
Why did he leave?
In Rhule's view?
Yeah.
Why did he leave? Yeah.
The importance of keeping Holgorsen around. Obviously that was something this guy wanted to do. That will be discussed. Yeah, I mean, those are the first things, and then how much. All the indications that we've got so far is that Dana Holgorsen, like he's the head coach of the offense now, right? Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? And what other changes might he want to bring forth?
Right. Dana Holgorsen is going to have a lot to say on how the offensive coaching staff looks. And we don't know the future of Marcus Satterfield. We don't know the future for Glenn Thomas, who coaches the Nebraska quarterbacks. And Dana likes to have a lot of influence on his quarterbacks. We don't know the future for Garrett McGuire. Nebraska's reportedly on the way to hiring Dakeil Shorts, who played for Holgorsen at West Virginia and then coached for him at Houston and has been at Kentucky with Mark Stoops for the last couple of years. Shorts was in town this week, has been in town, and expect that to happen. So with Garrett, Shorts would coach wide receivers. So what does that mean for Garrett McGuire? I don't think it necessarily means that McGuire is gone. In fact,
neither.
I'll just throw this out at the end. You could see Garrett McGuire as the quarterback's coach, and some people might go, whoa. I mean, look, Dana wants to coach the quarterbacks, and I think it would be beneficial for him to have someone coaching those, as the coach of the quarterback, like leading the meetings in the QB room, who can just reinforce Dana's message, like who isn't going to come in like Glenn Thomas might with his own entire set of way that he wants to coach the quarterbacks. Garrett McGuire can coach the quarterbacks the way that Dana Holgorsen wants him to coach them.
Garrett McGuire played quarterback.
He did.
He's been in those meetings before. He sort of knows how that works, I guess, a little bit. And I'll also say this, Garrett's around. For anybody who's like, Garrett's leaving, he's around. I know this because he's featured in Nebraska's recruiting breakdown videos that they're doing today, which were recorded last night. So that's happening right now. He's wearing an N on his chest. So at least for the moment.
Absolutely. And I don't necessarily expect that to change. If he finds something outside of the program that is better for him than being the Nebraska, well, I mean, he's not going to be the Nebraska receivers coach, but if he finds something that's better for him than being a part of this staff, then, you know, he'll go do that. But as of now, he's a part of this thing moving forward. So, all right, that's it for this Wednesday. We'll be back on Thursday with reaction to everything that Matt Rhule had to say on signing day. Thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Big Ten podcast. Craig puts the Big Ten first. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts.